everyone. Welcome back to the National Security Summit. I'm Laura Winter. I am the editor and host of the Downlink podcast, which for those of you who are interested in the intersection of space, the space business, and defense, check it out. But for this segment of the National Security Summit, I am privileged and honored to introduce a security professional who has been there, done that, and probably has a drawer full of t-shirts from her 22-year career with the FBI. Jana Monroe has served as the special agent in charge in Los Angeles and Phoenix and is not only the first assistant director of the FBI Cyber Division. Jana is also the FBI's first female profiler in the elite behavioral science unit. Jana is now in the private sector and was most recently the vice president of global security and remains as a consultant for Herbalife, an international and publicly traded company with a market cap of $1.5 billion, according to Forbes. Jana, thank you so much for making the time to join me today.
Oh, Laura, it's great to be with you. Thank you so much for the invitation.
Now, before we dive into the intersection of corporate security and national security, let's take a moment or two to talk about your most recent achievement, and that's your book, Hearts of Darkness, Serial Killers, the Behavioral Science Unit, and My Life as a Woman in the FBI. You know, writing a book, especially an autobiography that's more than slightly touched by evil, is not easy. I've got to tell you, Jana, I read the book over Christmas and I recommend it to everybody out there. It's a page turner, but briefly give our audience a synopsis and why you wrote this book now.
Well, thank you, Laura. I'll start with the reason I wrote this book now. I think for me, I look at, and there's a lot of inaccuracies on this topic, and I'm saying this topic of serial killers and behavioral science, and I know it's a lot of people enjoy it because it's compelling and repulsive at the same time. And I just thought I would be able to add a degree of accuracy and genuineness to this, because that's what I did for years. And also, deeply in my heart, I feel very badly for the victims of the violent crime and the loved ones who grieve their loss. And the victims don't have a voice. And so this was, my book was like a tribute and an honor to them.
And what I found and continue to find both fascinating and a real truism is that, and it's clearly woven throughout your book, is that intense experiences shape our approach to other facets of our lives and professions. I'd like to know how those 5 years inside the behavioral sciences unit, the serial murderers and rapists and the victims, right? How you've taken that very special experience and those analytical skills and applied them in your later career at the FBI and now in the corporate world, which you and, your position and positions that you've recently held, has been very international and intersects with national security.
Well, when you look at the skills that I learned on the job, and then just from the experiences with this, and it was called a behavioral science unit until a judge took exception to that and said it's not really a science, it's analytical. So henceforth, the behavioral analysis unit. But I think the skills that I learned not only from the training, but from on the job is that reading of people. As humans, we give off signals much more non-verbally than verbally. And when you have an incongruency, meaning when someone says something, but their actions or their whatever they do with their eyes or their hands says something else, I learned a lot about that in interviewing people. And even though you're looking at maybe, criminals, felons, serial killers, you can take that skill set and apply it to corporate or to whatever kind of a business you're in when you're interviewing for a position, when you're speaking with someone else, when you're trying to elicit information from someone. It's the same skill set, only with a different audience, if you will.
And now I want to kind of shift gears ever so slightly. I'm not really sure that folks really make the connection that corporate security is actually part of the fabric of national security. And I think an easy example of this is your time with Southern California Edison. As a utility, it's part of the energy sector, which is an official critical infrastructure, right? I mean, that's according to the U.S. government's Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, or CISA. But when you landed there, that utility wasn't exactly secured and there was an incident. Could you take, some time and run us through the traps of why this company's security is actually a national security concern?
Oh, absolutely. When you're looking at the sectors that are part of the key national infrastructure, and of course, electric utility is, Southern California Edison had, the grid in addition to a nuclear plant. And when you look at, just think of the ramifications if that went dark. Okay, if that were attacked and the grid was down, there goes all of your power, all of your electricity. There's the ports of Los Angeles and Long Beach where you have your supply chain, all your deliveries. That's going to impact every business that you have in the area. It's going to impact transportation. I mean, when you think of the wide range of ramifications, it is literally going to shut down business. And depending on what you have as contingency plans for backup, for an incident response, is going to have a significant impact on when you're up and running again. So to me, looking at all of I'd look through the lens because of my security background, something from a terrorist perspective or someone just with evil intent, any kind of nefarious scheme that you would look at that could either impact the nuclear plant or the grid itself, was the way that we approached security and what that impact would have, and not only to that area, but again, as you say, to national security.
And when you arrived there, in a pre-interview that we had, you mentioned that you had actually already started advising the company and that an incident actually kind of arose, and that all kind of comes back from your time when you were at the FBI. I mean, just using that, again, very specialized skill set that you have, right?
Right. And so what I was looking at is the culture and environment of the company. And it was generation after generation of family members that worked there, which can be a good thing or a bad thing. We'll refer to it as nepotism. It's fine as long as everyone gets along, but then you start having divorces and somebody's working next to an ex. And, you're just looking at typical human behavior. You have that with a company or an environment that like to hear good news always. And that's not really how life is. So you have to have management and leadership that understands there's going to be issues and they need to address with them. Because of that, I thought there were a confluence of items that made the company at risk for a potential active shooter situation. And unfortunately, that did happen. There was an active shooter that left 3 employees dead and 3 seriously injured. But what I had done was analyzed the environment of the company, the culture of the company, and those were the indicators, and we had them on a scale previously, that would be a metrics for a risk. So how much is a company at risk for some kind of an act of violence?
Yeah, it's incredible because I don't think a lot of people really understand that, an employee, an insider threat, that that we hear about people going quote unquote postal, right, or shooting things up, but that this actually could have a ramification that could go all the way out to the Los Angeles ports, right?
Oh, absolutely. Again, you're taking a look at something when you always looked at security in concentric circles. It's like you'd have something, there's an alarm system and you have badging for people to get in. You do background checks on employees to get into the company. But you have all of those things. And there's a nexus right there then with cyber. I don't want to get too far ahead, but that's why those two functions need to work so closely together. And for an insider threat, you've got your employees or others that have access and are inside your campus, inside your company, that you've got to have programs and processes in place to vet these people, because that's one of the biggest areas of threat, because people who are insiders, employees, and have that access they have access to information or intellectual property that could definitely be a national security issue.
So now I want to take a look at what's perhaps not so easy an example, and that's the company Herbalife. I'd like for us to start this off. If you could just give us the basics, like what is it, where is it, how big is the footprint globally? How many employees? What are the big data points that our audience should understand about what Herbalife is before we actually start talking about, the threat situation and the, corporate security and its intersection with national security? Yeah. What is Herbalife?
Sure, Laura. Well, Herbalife Nutrition, it's a multinational, multi-billion dollar revenue generating vitamin supplement and drink enhancement company, but it really focuses on comprehensive wellness and well-being, footprint in 96 countries. And it operated, it's a great company, but it operated more when I got there, more like I'll say a mom and pop company. It had grown exponentially and so had really grown more than it was taking a look at its security function and security processes. As is anywhere, when you're in 96 countries, some of those are not so friendly. And each one of them, you're going to have to take a different look at their laws, the regulatory environment, in addition to their security environment.
And how many employees are we roughly talking about? I mean, like
Yep. When I
thousands
started,
or?
oh no, it was approximately 8,500. It's a little less than that now, but we're talking, in the thousands. There probably are about 7,500 at this point. So
And that
it's
would
yeah.
also include, like manufacturing facilities all the way through administration, just so that I, get the whole sort of picture.
Sure. Manufacturing facilities in China, in California, in Winston-Salem, and you're looking at actual offices in all of the 96 countries. And it's a multi-level marketing sales force, which means the distributors are not employees of the company. So in addition to the 85, 7,500 employees, there are hundreds of thousands of distributors as the sales force.
Wow, that's a
Yeah, so
lot.
that added complications because you are looking at the rules and policies, procedures for employees that differ from that of distributors. But when you're looking at reputation, you're looking at the stock market and the public, right? It's all one Herbalife. So that made it a little more complex. And then throw in the different 96 countries with it, it became a complex environment.
So now, when you walk through the door there, that was back in 2014, almost exactly 10 years ago.
Yes.
Herbalife was not exactly in a good place in its security posture, its brand, its employees, the facilities, its distributors, the C-suite, spouses, and even children were facing a growing list of threats, very specific threats, creepy, skin crawling threats. I don't want to get into the ins and outs of Herbalife's business practices, but I really want you to set the scene. I mean, like when you walked into the offices there, it was a multi-altitude storm, right?
Yes, I love that multi-altitude storm. It certainly was. And Bill Ackman, who is a hedge fund activist, was shorting the stock at Herbalife and trying to take it to zero. He was very public about that and very threatening and intimidating. And Herbalife, hadn't expected that, but I have to give the company a lot of credit. When I was hired for that, they had already had a team that was working to address that, while they had another team that was working to keep, business as usual. You've got to have sales, you have to have operations and run the business. But in the interim of all that, the CEO's family was being threatened and intimidated. You had daily negative press. The reputation of the company, not only on Wall Street, but again in the community, was very negative, and they had to respond to that. And they had a small corporate communication function, which they had to ramp up immediately, so that they would be able to respond externally and internally. And again, as I mentioned, there's a distributor model, and some of the distributors in different countries weren't understanding what was going on. So there was a whole different communication strategy to keep everybody informed as much in real time as possible. The other part was, again, I had mentioned the company had grown so exponentially. Their regular traditional security, badging and cameras and vetting and making sure that people were not in your company space that didn't have approval to have access, all of that needed to be ramped up also.
And just to really illustrate to the audience, what kind of threats we're talking about. I mean, there was a threat that the CEO's wife received on her cell phone coming back from her daughter's soccer match. Is that right? Could you
Yes.
illustrate that
Yes.
for us? Because
Yeah,
that's
that's
creepy as
correct.
heck.
Oh yeah, she received a threat that that they knew where she and her daughter was, and that son was home alone, and that he could be threatened. So it's one of those eerie things, threatening the whole family. And you take a look at it, the company wasn't doing anything wrong, but you had this activist that had his own agenda. So the company, and specifically the CEO's wife, but other of spouses of the company, were not expecting this. And of course, the C-suite hadn't been able to articulate it because they didn't see this coming either. So it was kind of this
Sure.
confluence of negativity all at the same time, and they had to address all facets of this like instantly. It wasn't something let's get on this next week, next month.
So, under those circumstances, right? I'm sure that your list of what to do first was actually quite long, but really, really, what was the first security issue there that you tackled, and why was it that one that you felt that needed to be taken care of first?
Okay, so keep in mind, like I said, there was a small team that was dealing with the attack and the incident. So, of course, I met with them first to see what actually they were doing. But my next order of business is that the company had become lackadaisical because, and I certainly understand this, they said, we're a nice company. And how that translated into process is they had badges, but if people forgot them or weren't wearing them, other employees would just let them in. It's like, oh, come on in, whether they knew them or not. So here you're having a process of just anybody and everybody can come in to the company, and this was in downtown LA, in an LA live setting. And I only say that is because there's a lot of there's a huge homeless contingent there. There's some crime in that area, and that's the whole reason for having badges, is so you don't tailgate, which means you just open the door and let anybody in, is because everybody in the building needed to have a background check so that we knew who was actually in our premises so we could protect our employees. So it was a twofold, in that there wasn't enough badging process, but also people were not acknowledging the why we were doing it. It was for protection, not because we were the department that said no. So I embarked on a video campaign and posters and a big explanation as to this is a positive, not a negative, as to why we need you to badge in and not let other people in without knowing who they are. And we also offered, if they were not comfortable, the employees were not comfortable with confronting someone and saying, I'm sorry, I need to see your badge, we had increased security officers, and they could then just refer them to a security officer. So they could play the heavy hand, if you will.
So you got a good cop, bad cop thing going.
Yeah, and like I said, it sounds minor, but it really was a starting point because I had to work on developing that culture of security, because security is everybody's business. You can't have some small department, and you don't want that. You don't want to be, like I said, the department of no or law enforcement, because you're not. And when everyone understands it's their business, it's a cliche, see something, say something, but it's very important. When you have all the eyes and ears of the entire company, with that mindset, something's wrong, something's out of place, I need to report this, then you have a much better chance of having better security.
And perhaps people should also think of it as, like their home. And it's not, if you're in Los Angeles
You know?
and you work and live in Los Angeles, it's not like you leave the front door open and unlocked, right?
Right.
I mean,
Or
I'm
your
just
keys in
saying,
your car, or right. I mean, you
windows
take a,
roll down,
yep.
right? I mean,
Yeah, you have to be savvy about that. Maybe if you're in a rural area of, the Midwest or something, some of those things are still done, but that's a far cry from LA, New York, and some of the major cities. You just have a different environment.
sure. But,
Yeah.
something that I also really found really interesting from the news clips is that you reached back into your very specialized experience with evil and criminal minds, right? And you commissioned a profile on the billionaire Bill Ackman, and just for everybody to understand, he's a hedge fund manager and the founder and CEO of Pershing Square Capital Management. And right now he's actually in a bit of a dust up with Harvard University, right? But,
Yes.
you know, why and what should be the lesson really for all security professionals tuning into this discussion? Because I don't think everyone out there is going to have on their list, yeah, let's profile the financially and politically powerful billionaire, right? I mean, he's got celebrity status. Why was that deep dive into, just what makes Ackman tick so important, to you and to the company?
Great question. And the reason is, and like you said, it's something you learn from behaviorally. It's like, what does make him tick? So is he going to take this to the nth degree? Is he going to use every amount of money that he has for that and his clients too to do this? Is this the hill he's going to die on? Or is this, it's kind of like, make it analogous to poker, right? So is somebody going to play a hand or not play a hand? Really, if he had narcissistic tendencies. I won't get too psychological on you here. But knowing some of that behavior, it would give us an insight into how far is he going to take this and how much should we as a company invest in this? I mean, resource wise, monetarily, is this something where he will go away? There's a new shiny object over here and maybe he will go for that company. So it was trying to get as much insight as to his motivation and intent. Those are the two number one and two things for why a crime is committed. It's motive, right? Why did someone do that? When you find that out, that makes it, everything falls into place if you're going to be able to solve a crime. And those were the same things from a criminal aspect that we were able to apply to Bill Ackman.
And with that information, then, you just said that, what kinds of investments or where you would, want to bolster some of security, whether it's brand security, online security, or just be ready with the correct press release, et cetera, et cetera. With that information, how did the company invest? Like how did you use that?
Well, how we ended up using it was what the results were, or what the indications were, is that it was not going to be his hill to die on, right? And so with some of the, and I think the company, just my opinion, but I think the company did an excellent job of fighting back. He started to realize, and like I said, we had a great corporate communication team that was built very quickly. He started realizing that the company wasn't going to roll over or lay down or go away or even look for, let's cut our losses, let's compromise. The company was fighting back. I think that's where he underestimated Herbalife and the executive team. So that
Interesting.
profile helped decide whether we should hit this head on. It's almost like if you look in a courtroom, right? Are we going to do a plea bargain? Are we going to do a jury trial? Are we, what do we think is the best way to approach this to win? And that's what the profile was kind of the foundation for helping with.
Wow, interesting. And now today, I mean, Herbalife is a huge company, right? We're now 10 years after, that dust up. It has a solid brick and mortar footprint, and does business in pretty much every continent that's inhabited. 20% of its business is in China, which represents its own set of security challenges. It recently launched a new website starting in the Singapore market. In the past 30 days, it named a new president. That's Stefan Paolo Graziani. And if I'm saying your name wrong, please forgive me. I'm sorry.
No, you did a great job with his name.
Okay. Just, haven't met you yet. And it also inked a memorandum of understanding with a university in Himachal Pradesh. And that's in India. Yeah, this could be considered, small change, but I'm bringing all these things up and their different levels of importance to illustrate, just how deep into foreign countries Herbalife goes, right? It's very international, which means the threat landscape is actually quite expansive. And now you have the added pressures of geopolitical schisms, especially in East Asia, where, Herbalife has 20% at least just in China of its business. And you've got hot wars with Russia's invasion of Ukraine, and you've got the Israel Hamas war. How do these larger global crises and national security challenges inform a company's security posture, right? What gaps or concerns in this current global security environment do you think other security professionals need to be sure to cover down on?
Excellent question. And that's the way that we approached it, as I do know many other companies do too. We had regional security advisors, which was a security personnel in each one of the regions, because as we previously mentioned, there's different laws, regulatory environment, legal. So they are the literally boots on the ground employees that can keep us current with those situations, because otherwise, you have your intel or your intelligence, but that's coming from a different source. You can then use that intelligence that's also coming from your own employees. But, all of the geopolitical schisms and scenarios you just mentioned, never a dull moment. Those are the things that you need all of that intel for, because each one of those is going to be handled a little differently. And the way that we approached it, we had corporate, which the corporate was located in Los Angeles, but you need to have a corporate voice that then has the flexibility to incorporate all of the different security concerns in the different areas. So you've got that flexibility, but you're still being seen as represented as one company. Something goes awry in India, and it's not going to be Herbalife India, it's going to be Herbalife. So corporate certainly needs to know what's going on, and the decision makers need to have an option of information so that they can make decisions based on accurate information. And I think one of I don't know if I'm going to call it a gap, but let's just call it a big concern, is getting that the congruency of cybersecurity with traditional security, and making sure those two functions in each one of the company are working in partnership.
And also with, when we're thinking about cybersecurity and Herbalife, I'm not really sure if it falls into one of the critical infrastructures. So it may not have access to, all the tools and bells and whistles of CISA. But, one of the things that I also think is important is, how do you interact with your national government? I mean, Herbalife has a footprint. You're now consulting with other companies that have international footprints, or at the very least, an international employee base. Um, how much do you think, companies, or are they, smart about interacting also with the U.S. government, whether it be the Department of Defense, the Department of State, Department of Commerce, the Department of Justice, the FBI, et cetera, et cetera?
I think that is something that's just a constant push. And that typically you'll see that for the positions that I've held, which are called Chief Security Officer, in a posting for that will be one of the requirements, is that you have contacts with and engage frequently with all the federal agencies that you just mentioned. But I can't say enough how important that is, because the two are really intertwined. Like you said, when you look at commerce and you look at publicly traded companies and privately, the business that they do, there's so many entry points for that national security. And even like now, Herbalife was not considered part of the key national infrastructure, but since I already belonged to a lot of these organizations within DOJ, FBI, DOD, I kept my contacts up with that. And where appropriate, we would exchange information that would safeguard the company. But I think also on the other side, since I was in the government for so long, I think there's a tendency for the government to underestimate how important companies are to the national infrastructure and what they bring to the table.
Well, with that, then, and this I think will really, close out our discussion. What would you recommend then to government? Is it a way of how they should engage with corporate America? Is it that they need to broaden their lens to, companies that may not be part of the quote unquote sectors of critical infrastructure, and to engage with them to support their security because it could have a knock-on effect on national security? I mean, what would you recommend, based on your, many years of experience, both, with a badge and in the private sector?
Well, it's a great question. There are those programs, the public-private partnerships that do exist. InfraGard is one. There's a DSAC, Domestic Security Alliance. I won't go into the number of them. So they do exist, but what I see is that there is not enough emphasis on them, and I don't think they put enough importance on them. When I'm saying they, I'm referring to the federal government. I think it should be more of a push from their perspective. They're outreaching. They make it known that these exist, but there's not really actively going out to the public companies private companies and saying, here we are, this is what we do, this is the benefit of us partnering together. I think that's a part that's a gap. It exists, but it's certainly not a focal point.
Jana, thank you so much for your time. This has just been an absolutely fascinating discussion.
I can't thank you enough. This is a really important topic, and it was my honor to be able to discuss it with you.